Listen up.
Welcome to the PowerShell Podcast, the podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community. And now, here's your host, Andrew Plaw.
Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast, your weekly podcast for everything PowerShell community projects and more. And we have a very special episode in store for you today. But first, I want to highlight a couple of things that, you know what, we may end up talking about on the podcast. I want to give a shout out to Shaun's talk about gaming PowerShell for fun and profit, where he goes through creating a snake game for PowerShell from scratch. I think he gave this at like a code conference, Code Mash or Code Smash. I don't know. We'll talk to him about it, hear his perspective on it, because it's pretty sweet. Also want to talk about the Posh Spectre console new release. There's a link to that in the show notes for upgrading to V2. Want to give a plug to a recent talk that Shaun gave at the Pacific PowerShell user group, where he talked about the new release and some cool stuff there. But let's just dive right into it. I think we did this last time when we had you on, Shaun. Welcome to the podcast, recurring guest. This is your second time. I think it's been about a year since we last talked. Been looking forward to catching up again. Shaun Lawrie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Andrew.
I gave you a little brief introduction. I think you were expecting a little more, but you know, we do things on the fly here.
I was expecting fireworks, pyro, a big intro, maybe some loud music.
Yeah, the fireworks, a little dangerous for the background here, but next time I'll get those for you.
Yeah.
So you've been busy lately. Yeah, man, anytime.
Yeah, been busy. That's one way to describe it. Oversubscribed, picking too many hobbies, but yeah, busy is busy, good word.
I think last time we talked SpectreConsole, Posh SpectreConsole, or Posh SpectreConsole. I don't know how you would like to pronounce it, but I think it was rather in its infancy. And I think it's come a long way since then.
It definitely was. It was, I think I had a handful of downloads, mostly me, testing it myself. I had a version 0 point something, which was just my first initial cut. And then I suppose over the last, about 12 months, gone from that to a version 1 to a version 2, kind of arbitrary version numbers somewhat. I had a few people ask me on version 1, what are the breaking changes? And I was like, hopefully nothing. I just refactored the whole thing so that other people could contribute. And then V2 has been a big upgrade.
Have you had any other people getting in contributing yet?
Yes, yeah, I've had a few. That's actually last year when I started it. I saw a use for it and I was just for myself. So I just published it just to build in the open, just contribute. And it really only suited my use cases, what I'd been using it for, like all of the stuff that I'd done in work that I found would be easier if I had a library like that. And then at a point, people started trying to contribute, and I had a couple of contributors, someone called Future Motion Dev, F Motion on GitHub, and TrackD, and they wanted to improve all of the table rendering stuff. So taking a PowerShell object, pumping it into SpectreConsole and having a table object come out the other side. And that was something I'd avoided because I thought, I'll just use format table for that. I was like, why would I use SpectreConsole? And people wanted it. So they started trying to contribute. And then I realized that they were stepping on my toes and I was stepping on theirs because there was absolutely zero test coverage. And I couldn't guarantee that what they were doing wasn't going to break everything. So from going from 0 to 1, the entire thing was just rewriting it to make it testable so I could write a pester suite. And also helping integrate their changes so that we had all the new features. I think version 1 was mainly adding table rendering and stuff, I think, to the library.
Yeah, some good ways to make TUIs. So can you give us a brief introduction? I know we teased this a little bit on the recent Justin Grody episode, but what is SpectreConsole and what is a TUI?
So the terminal is hopefully an interface you're familiar with. You've typed around in that. It's a text-based interface. The T in TUI stands for text-based, UI being user interface. The word TUI does indicate that it's going to be something mildly interactive. So a user interface that sometimes you can click on. In this case of SpectreConsole, it's a library for, I guess you'd call them UI widgets. They're not really, it's not a full terminal UI setup. I think we've got some other bits and pieces for that. I think there's one called, there's a PowerShell one for building like a full-blown clickable UI where you can click on things and you can do pop-up windows. This one is more like for building interactive scripts. So if you want to present someone with some checkboxes or a list of items to select. That's what SpectreConsole is really good for. And by not making itself a TUI library, it makes it quite flexible. That's where I thought it might fit well with PowerShell, because I'd spent a lot of time doing a lot of manually mucking around with getting animations and visuals in the terminal. And at a point, I realized there was so many things that I was constantly doing that were the same. SpectreConsole had that overlap, and it had already been done by Patrick Svensson, first draft hell. And then I thought, well, if it's .NET, I can just probably drag that into PowerShell and take the credit for all of his hard work. That'd be pretty cool. And that's what I did. And I've tried to make it clear that I have not written the entirety of the SpectreConsole.NET library, but that's basically as a wrapper for it. So to be able to bring some of that .NET goodness over to PowerShell to make your terminal user interfaces slightly more sexy.
Nice. And I think that's a great way to describe it. I think you have an affinity for that interface and making things look good, whether it's your documentation, where it's push paint, which it's wild to me that project has more stars than SpectreConsole.
Yeah, there's a big difference between something that's virally hot versus like actually useful. I think you'll find the viral stuff, you'll get a load of GitHub stars, loads of engagement because it hits something like the top of Hacker News, and then all of a sudden a bunch of bots click on it. And I suspect that's where all the stars come from. I don't know if they're real people, but a lot of that didn't convert to actual downloads or usage. Whereas I think, the ratio is completely different for SpectreConsole. It's like nearing 10,000 downloads, but it has like 90 stars or something.
Get some stars on that. Yeah, if you're listening to this, check out the repository, give it a star, and use it.
Shout out to James Brundage, who actually, he encouraged me to turn on GitHub sponsorship. So that guy's sponsoring me, which was pretty unexpected. He just messaged me out of the blue and said, "Hey, would you like a GitHub sponsorship?" And I said, "What is that?" Turns out it's pretty cool. Got $5 a month going in. So yeah.
Nice. I love that. I'd love to see more of that. More companies sort of allocate at least some resources. It doesn't have to be a ton, but work that into their budgets here and there. You use 20 different GitHub projects for various things. Subscribe, sponsor them.
I mean, for me, it just pays for my second employee, which is GitHub Copilot. So it's quite handy.
So a lot of people write little tools and have little functions for different things. And it sounds like SpectreConsole is a way to enhance that and make it maybe more usable, more shareable, more fun. That is a guarantee. You're going to have more fun when you see the pretty colors and the different graphs and things like that. What's a common, easy entry-level use case for using Posh SpectreConsole?
I like, the main one for me was progress bars. So with SpectreConsole, I could monitor the progress of, say, 6 PowerShell jobs and have them all independently render a progress bar, which to do that with PowerShell is quite complicated. To do it with SpectreConsole is still kind of complicated, but not quite as bad. So you can spin up, say, 5 PowerShell jobs, and inside each of the jobs, if you're using write progress, it is write progress, right? That's the function name. Yeah, if you're using write progress and you write a progress percentage, that gets slurped up by SpectreConsole and gets used to render each of the progress bars. So you can track the progress of each task independently, which for me, my main initial use case for that was we use a tool called Octopus Deploy, and I wanted to kick off 8 deployments, kind of figure out how far they were through. And in doing so, I also needed to ask you, "Hey, Andrew, which environments do you want to deploy these 8 projects to?" And out of the box, PowerShell's user select options aren't the greatest. They can do the job, but I wanted for you to be able to go through and select a checkbox and say, "I want it in environment A, environment B, environment C," or maybe an environment grouping. So I want it in all pre-prod environments. And SpectreConsole gave you the option to build nested checkboxes. So you could say, "Here's a group called pre-prod, and it has these items in it. I just want to select the top, and then it's going to deploy there." I liked it for those 2 primarily, progress bars and multi-select input. Bring some of just the UI niceties of checkboxes and things to the console.
Yeah. I think that parameter validation and like things like validate set, it's cool. You can tab through different available things, but there's definitely a limiting factor, especially if you're going to share that with others, or that better user experience does matter, and your module provides a lot of that.
I suppose, yeah, that's actually a good point. For people that are used to terminal applications, autocomplete works really well. For people who are super unfamiliar with it, they get as far as writing the command name in and hitting enter. And so this is more of an interactive mode for the scripts. Pretty much everything I write still has the option of running it all as one script with a bunch of commandlet parameters or whatever. But generally speaking, I find a lot of people want to be asked and like step through like a wizard of what they need to do. And I like to have that as a backup option.
Yeah, I was in that boat, and I think many others are, where they'll write some PowerShell tools and they do the job, whatever task it is. But when it comes to distributing those around their company, you either have to train everybody and hope that they remember what you said in 2 weeks when they don't use the tool and they have to use it again, or you have to write some kind of wrapper, probably not as beautiful as this one, but some kind of wrapper to make it easier for them so they'll actually use the tools and get value out of the PowerShell that we're all already writing, right? If you're listening to this podcast, you probably have tons of functions or things or scripts, and a couple of tweaks, you can make it a lot more usable and distributable.
Yeah, we've got at my company, I don't know, in the realm of 80 people using the stuff that I've written, and I wrote it all by hand. And so I've got thousands of lines of code that's related to just drawing things on the terminal and putting checkboxes in place. And at this point, I wish I'd had SpectreConsole then, because like half of my code base is just the logic for prompting the user. And with 80 people using it, it can become pretty interesting, to say the least, when you're trying to convince people to use terminal applications that aren't super familiar with them.
Yeah. And maybe they're PowerShell people and they'd be comfortable with that. Maybe they're not. Maybe they have another language of choice, or maybe they don't use one at all. But this sort of makes it the entry point a lot less steep.
I've got at least 3-4 people converted from writing Bash scripts to PowerShell scripts at work. So I chalk that up as a success.
How'd you convince them?
Well, they end up using the scripts and saying, oh, how do I do this? And then the option is either A, research it yourself, or copy what I've done. And so they've slowly just transitioned across, which has been neat.
Little osmosis.
It does help that a lot of people are C# developers, so they kind of do see some of the parallels. And once you start to see that, you realize that there's not really much difference between the two.
Yeah. And I think that your background in C# is part of the reason why you created this project, Spectre.console, finding a C# project and then converting it into PowerShell. I love seeing that. In my opinion, the C# ecosystem is quite vast, and the ability to leverage those in PowerShell and make them a little bit easier for people who maybe don't know C# I love to see it.
Yeah, I put a bit of a blog up on my personal site about that. It was most of the reason that I did this, because I did find SpectreConsole useful enough to use it frequently, but I found that everything I did had like a bunch of boilerplate, and a lot of it would be, 50 lines of code to put a prompt on the page. And I used it often enough that I thought, maybe I'll just hide all this away. It's all still there. Like, you can't avoid the complexity of like dealing with talking to C# from PowerShell. There's some bits and pieces that they're obtuse. They're not super trivial to figure out, and you got to spend a lot of time reading. And yeah, I've done all of that in the module. I think I still don't know if I regret the decision, but I made an initial decision to keep the module written primarily in PowerShell, talking to C#, because I could have taken the C# library and written a C# based PowerShell module.
Like a binary module? Yeah,
but I figured it was probably neat to show like how all the PowerShell stuff can interface with it if you really want to. If you want to work hard enough, like you can do it all from PowerShell. There's a couple of weird edge cases where I think you do require C#. Anything touching asynchronous code can get pretty gnarly working in the PowerShell ecosystem, but yeah, pretty much everything else you can do it all in PowerShell.
What are the similarities between PowerShell and C#?
I think if you want to know more of the similarities, I think Justin Grody's done a good job of summarizing them in a previous PowerShell podcast. Following on from that, I feel super unqualified to actually explain to you how any of that works. But the gist being, PowerShell and C# have they run on the same runtime, so the common language runtime. It's primarily all C# behind the scenes. So if you look at PowerShell itself, like the PowerShell library, PowerShell exe, that's an all C# app. They share a lot of common DNA. Once you get into it and see how things work, they start to look very similar. Just the syntax is so different.
Yeah. So say someone has a bunch of experience in PowerShell, maybe they've written modules, but they've done nothing in C#. What's a good kind of entry point thing they should maybe look at doing? Would it be making a binary module for PowerShell since there's some shared things there? Or is there some kind of common project that people do to get up to speed on C#?
It depends on what interests you. I think if you're going to try and learn something new, it has to be interesting, or else it's just going to be an absolute slog. For me, I kind of like making websites. So the first thing I would do if I was starting to learn C# would install the .NET CLI, do .NET new web, or whatever the template's called for building a website, and then start from there and try to change it. I work from examples first and then try to wrap my head around how things work. And then after that, we'll read more of the documentation and figure out if what I've guessed is actually how it's operating. So yeah, that's an interesting way to do it, but that's just how I learn. And building web apps is quite cool.
I think it's cool how .NET has that kind of template thing you can use. Can you repeat what that command was?
It's called .NET, not with a period, but DOTNET. If you go and install the .NET SDK, that's the software development kit. It used to be a pretty heavy-handed operation to go and install that on your dev machine, but nowadays the .NET CLI is available on like Winget or I think Homebrew and stuff for Mac, and it is cross-platform, so you can chuck that on there, and you've got one command line tool to start your experience. .NET new, and then you open up VS Code or NeoVim or whatever you want to use and start cracking away at it.
Nice. Are there any other .NET projects that you'd like to see make their way to the PowerShell space?
This is the main one for me. I've had people, ask me about SpectreConsole so many times, and I suppose some of the other bits and pieces, I found it really difficult recently to just get an Azure, like a bearer token for a user. I was like, I want to know who you are. Like, I know you're already on a PC on the domain. I just want to be able to verify that when I talk to an API. Some of the Azure, I'm actually using the Azure CLI to get that now. I think there's a bunch of stuff there that is not super well exposed. And if you start to look at those Azure commandlets, they are ginormous. There's so many of them. I get overwhelmed with choice and I don't know which one does what. And the documentation is there, but I can't see much from the way of examples. So I don't know. It's less about what .NET stuff I'd like to bring over. It's more like narrow scoped tooling.
Yeah.
Bringing over some of those bits and pieces that exist in the .NET land. I found the Microsoft Authenticator library in .NET was really easy to use. And then when I came to PowerShell, I was like, what options have I got? Not a super well-defined equivalent.
Let's compare and contrast PowerShell and C#. For you, what are the strengths of PowerShell compared to C#?
Speed to get up and running. I can have something working almost immediately in PowerShell. In C#, I'm going to have an IDE, or you can do it all on the terminal, but you're going to have like a build toolchain. Most of the time, if you've already got PowerShell, you don't need to do any setup for a new project. You start writing a new file. I like not having like a compilation step. So if I write the code, it's kind of, I see what I get. I don't have to deal with the intricacies of packaging and all that stuff. I just think the speed is the main thing. Because you can do more stuff in C#. It often ends up being more verbose for me. I think that goes both ways. You can make PowerShell as verbose as you want as well. And I think whenever you start writing stuff in PowerShell, you don't usually, well, I don't at least, think about testing to start with. I just want to get it working. Yeah. Whereas in C#, you bring a lot of that, you bring a lot of the baggage with you for knowing that you're going to add unit tests later. So you bring in dependency injection and you bring in a logger framework and you bring in all this stuff. And in PowerShell, you just go, do the command and write host when I feel like something needs to be said, or write output if you want to be more correct, I guess.
So let's say you're in your flow state, right? You're going, you got the docs ready for whatever you're working on. You kind of know the direction you're headed. What's more enjoyable to write in, PowerShell or C Sharp?
PowerShell for me, just because I don't know if I've heard people who don't have English as their first language explain to me how they think in a different language in their head, and then they have to translate it. That's how I feel when I'm doing any other language. Whereas I think in how it would work in PowerShell first, and then I could write that quicker. So that's
you learned C Sharp
it's my native
right?
language.
Yeah.
I learned Java and PHP first, and C. Yeah, so I learned a bunch of random languages at university, and then I went into the workforce and kind of stopped programming for a couple of years, and then got back into it. Wellington, New Zealand is a massive .NET ecosystem, so I had to learn some of the Microsoft stack, and in doing so, I wrote a couple of .bat files, a couple of batch scripts, and then realized just how limiting that was. And someone was like, "You should use PowerShell; it's better." From there, that's when I started writing a bit of PowerShell. C Sharp didn't come till a lot later, so I'd probably say in the last 3-4 years. So I've been touching on PowerShell for years before that.
In your day job, you're like a cloudy developer. Is that a fair way to describe it?
I'm the platform engineering lead at my company, so building kind of internal tooling, focused a lot on like quality and things, and tying together existing systems, which is where PowerShell came in quite handy. So my team have had to learn a lot of PowerShell because they've inherited a lot of things I wrote in the past with absolutely zero test coverage. Poor team, but yeah.
But you know Pester now. It sounds like you got that running in SpectreConsole as well.
Yep. I wish I'd learned that earlier, and it is super easy to use. But I think I missed out a lot on, I went into like QA and performance engineering when I came out of university, and I missed a lot of like the onboarding of being a developer. So I didn't really learn how to use Git very well. I didn't learn how to do unit testing or like other types of integration testing. I just went in and I got given problems and had to solve them. So I learned in a really backwards pattern, and not learning the testing side of it, like the unit testing side and how all that framework hangs together, has probably held me back a wee bit.
Yeah, I'd like to see more educational places, universities, whatever, cover more of that stuff and actually prepare people for best practice stuff, right? Get unit testing kind of front of mind, maybe cover some CI/CD pipelines, kind of get you thinking in that regard rather than just project-oriented type stuff.
Yeah, I think there's a long way to go in the education system to make it so that when you pop out of your education that you actually know what you should be doing in the industry. I think a lot of people, they do come out super prepared for what the university or the tertiary study teaches. But I've found that a lot of high schools seem to be teaching a lot of programming stuff now, and like focusing on the fun part of getting something working, which is something I think I missed at university. I focused a lot on the computer science side of it, and then came out of it thinking big O notation, like what's the algorithmic complexity of this stuff? And then someone's like, I just need to put this button on a page, and you're like, oh, it's different out here. No one cares about the science. They just want functions. They want stuff to operate. There's a whole business world out there that I was never really taught about.
I see a lot of younger people, like high school, middle school, with like robotics and programming, where it's that you can really see the result of what you're doing. It's a lot more rewarding than writing a calculator in C++.
Yeah. It depends on the person. Like I've got someone on my team, when I ask them like what kind of stuff they focus on, they say, I don't really want to be anywhere near that front end stuff. Like I don't care what it looks like. I just like building stuff that works. And I was like, oh. But then you talk to a lot of other people who say, like, if they can't see it, does it even exist? So it depends on what your focus is, I guess.
So back to the consoles. Before SpectreConsole, did you have any experience with TUIs?
Not really. I started learning. I wrote everything myself for my first kind of terminal UI. Learned how hard it was to get it right, and then spent a bit of time researching stuff, found SpectreConsole and kind of picked up on that. But yeah, no, that was probably it. Like just learning as I went. Like I've made so many mistakes, and what I've delivered is like not great. Sometimes I wonder about people judging me based on what's in there, and I'm like, oh well, it works. Like that was the focus. I said, get it working.
Yeah, you got to start somewhere. especially as a single developer. I mean, it's going to be hard to put out a boom finalized version. We don't need any improvements to this. You'll probably never publish it if that's the goal. You got to be okay with, like you said earlier, learning in public and putting it out there. And fast forward a year, and you never know what can happen.
Yeah, I feel sorry for one of the contributors, Track D, because they keep showing me better ways to do things, and I'm like, yeah, that would be really good. But I'm also just like focused on getting the features out, and I realize I've switched sides now. I'm more on the just like get it done than get it done properly. Whereas previously, I would have spent a lot of time dealing with the intricacies of how it works internally and kind of forgetting about just getting it done. Yeah, it can go both ways though. If you do it poorly enough, it can really burn you. Like skipping the tests in the first iteration. I thought that they were not required, but they 100% were.
So you have CI/CD stuff set up for this project, or just the testing locally?
Nah, CI/CD. If I'm going to get other people to help with it, it kind of needs to be in a controlled environment. It's too hard to guess what's on your computer.
And you don't want to manually test everything for all the different options that can go wrong, especially with a project like yours, where it's not necessarily a super simple one command kind of thing. There's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, I made one choice at the start, which I think has helped me in that Spectre testing, which is the original library has a test console, one that you can write all the commands to it, and you can send fake keystrokes, and then you can have it output what would have been sent to the terminal as a text file. So when I'm running the tests, I'm actually more doing snapshot tests. So if I'm rendering something, I know all the inputs, I know what it should look like, and then when I go to test it with a new version of the PWSHSpectreConsole DLL, or if I've changed things, when the tests run, it goes and spits out the old version and says, hey, this is what it used to look like, this is what it looks like now. So it's a visual test, which I didn't think would be possible when I started, because I was stuck in the unit testing landscape of just data in, data out. But having that has made things a lot easier. It's also caught a lot of things will change, and it'll say, oh, this is different now, the border color's changed. And I'll look at it and go, oh, that's because it was never working to begin with. It's all good. Yeah.
So people want to get started. You can install module, Posh SpectreConsole, and then you can start Spectre demo to see a bunch of different options. What do you think is the coolest, simplest way to get in and see results? Is it read Spectre text? Is it what command for you? Someone has, maybe they're not like super expert level PowerSheller. They're trying to get an entry point. Maybe they have some scripts already that they're running and looking to add a little bit of more functionality and interactivity to them.
I think the demo thing was handy. I've had at least one person feedback on that and say it was handy just to have a single point of entry to know what could potentially be done. Yeah, there's also one get Spectre demo features or something that I just added, which outputs kind of all of the visual options you can do. But that one is not as interactive.
What's the coolest use case you've heard about?
Any use case? I've had someone who's works in like computer game design or graphics that's been using it for color matching stuff. So they have a bunch of like color profiles and things, and they sent me a couple of screenshots, and I was like, oh, that's pretty neat. I don't know. I've just never thought of it being used outside of my use cases, which is as like platform delivery tooling. So anything that's outside of that is quite cool.
Yeah. That's cool. You can create a project that solves your use case, but if you write it in the proper way, it can be adapted and used in many other ways. And that doesn't just apply to like graphical or TUIs type stuff. That can be any kind of module, which to me is why I like the whole module thing. Is it can get value in all different kinds of ways. You just have to write the code one time, or in your case, maybe a few times, maybe a couple of rewrites in there, but it's cool that scales.
Yeah. I don't know what the future of it is. I kind of just like make the big change and then see how it settles. I didn't expect the live rendering to get as much attention as it did. It was actually, I had got version 2 ready, and then I thought, I'm not doing the live stuff. That looks too hard. And I put it off. And then someone raised a GitHub issue and said, can I write a table and then append rows to it and have it like animate it and finish it up? And I thought, it's going to be too hard. And I commented on the PR and said, it's too hard. You can do it this way if you really want to work. And then once I wrote that out, I thought, well, if I've answered the question, I may as well just like add the feature, because I've basically done the work I was avoiding doing. And then I added it, and then a few people were like, this is cool. I heard Justin Grody talking about it, how he had it like live rendering his container log output. And then Doug Fink had used it to build a Chat GPT style clone. So in the terminal, he could talk to it and it would have little speech bubbles popping in. And then after I saw other people use it, I thought, oh, this could be useful. And then I did a couple of demo pieces just for the Docs website of like a file picker and a couple other scenarios. And it's like, oh, yeah, just didn't see it. Just seeing other people use it's quite cool.
So the live rendering refers to, rather than just having a static table, you can create a table that is updated based on some input source.
Yeah, so it can be a table. It can be any Spectre item. Spectre has the concept of a renderable object. So anything that's renderable can contain other renderables. And there's one called a layout, which is I want to take the terminal and split it into two halves, or I want to have a column on the left and then 2/3 of it on the right to be another panel. So you can combine those layouts with other nested objects like tables or canvases for images or text and things. And then there's a wrapper function that effectively runs that in a loop, receives input from the user and re-renders them when stuff changes. It's like the world's most budget TUI framework, but it's something that works.
I just love how easy the entry point is to start using it. You don't need to have like all these different types and brackets and all this crazy stuff. You can just run PowerShell commands.
Yeah, I tried to keep it as PowerShell-y as possible. That was it was heavily opinionated on how I built a lot of this stuff. James Brundage didn't agree with some of my naming conventions, but I tried to. I was stuck between a hard place because I've got all the Spectre terminology doesn't quite line up with the PowerShell terminology, and so there were things like when you write a prompt, it would be like, do you put prompt as the parameter, which is what people would be familiar with in PowerShell, or do you put title, which is what's used in SpectreConsole? And then originally I went with the SpectreConsole format, and now I've just added aliases for both because I was like, I don't know. We'll stick with the PowerShell first, SpectreConsole as a backup. Yeah, it's been an interesting experience trying to get all this stuff working. But the PowerShell stuff, things like script blocks, I've tried to make them behave similarly to what you'd expect with things like start job and all that stuff, so you don't have to think too hard about how SpectreConsole's working. It's all hidden away.
I like that. Because I've seen the approach where you have to create a whole bunch of stuff and then put that as the parameters. But the simpler it can be, the better, in my opinion. But it's nice. I like your approach of using aliases whenever you rename parameters, because then it still works. If people have a script saved with the old value, they can update SpectreConsole and still use, if they're using the alias now instead of the primary command name. It's pretty adaptable in that regard.
Yeah, I posted the upgrade to V2 docs originally on pre-release because I have a pre-release branch. And then someone reached out and said, I don't like this. I don't want to have to do all these breaking changes. And that's when I went and add all the aliases. So thanks to TrackD for that one.
Nice. Yeah, that's good. That's, again, the benefit of building in public and doing stuff on GitHub is you can get those other opinions that maybe you didn't consider, right? Because nobody has the perspective of the whole world. We have our own little use case and our own little brains, but it's cool that you're open to contributions. And shout out to TrackD. Anybody who's using a PowerShell module, seeing things that could be improved and actually taking action on it on the published version rather than just their local install version of it, that is always going to make everything better.
Yeah, they're doing a bit of work at the moment with like syntax highlighting and things, because I wrote an old module for syntax highlighting with PowerShell, but it works really badly. And it's not compatible with SpectreConsole, but he's like, oh, it'd be cool if you could take the text of like a markdown document and have it part of the whole framework. And so he's working on that, which is quite cool. Yeah.
So what are some of the new features? I know you mentioned live rendering, but what else is coming in V2? Was that also when you added the pester tests?
No, V1 was pester test land. V2, object based. I think I heard Justin Grody talk about this. In the first version, whenever you rendered something, it would just spit it straight to the console. So it was effectively just visual only. Now, when you do something like write a panel, which is a border around something, you can actually return that object or pipe it through the PowerShell pipeline to nest things. That was not possible. So that's the main change that required heaps of refactoring to make it actually work that way. And so that means, what is it? So you get objects back. So it's more PowerShell-y, another step towards making it more PowerShell compatible. In doing so, I realized I didn't actually know how an object gets turned into what you see on the terminal. So I talked to James Brundage a bit about how like PowerShell formatters work. And so that's another change that was in there. So if it gets output to the terminal, it'll get drawn properly. Otherwise, it was just going to say the type name, which was not very nice. And I didn't want to have you pipe it into a special function every time you want it to be drawn. So yeah, using PowerShell formatters and everything returns renderable objects is the main big change. Plus the feature parity with what's available in SpectreConsole. So I've implemented everything that's there. I've implemented everything at a surface level. So I haven't implemented all of the detailed configurable bits and pieces of each of those functions of SpectreConsole. I've just been adding stuff as people ask for it.
Nice. Yeah, I think your module is a good example of one that is easy to get started with, but the upper bound limits of what you can do can be pretty complex.
Yeah, you could do a lot with it if you really wanted to. Yeah.
You seen anybody make any games with it? Go ahead though.
I've been making a little game. I just wanted to make like a Tamagotchi style thing, like a virtual pet. So if I'm in the terminal, I use Oh My Posh. I just want it to say the pet is hungry. The pet is hungry. The pet is going to die. So you have to like go into it and feed it or something. I don't know. I thought that would be cool. And I've been playing a little bit with. I got way distracted, and I started to get into Sixels. I don't know if you've seen what those are, but trying to render more high resolution images in the terminal for that. But I've recently found I don't think it's going to really work well with SpectreConsole, so I'm stuck with the chunky pixelated block characters to draw things. But yeah, I haven't seen other people write games. That would be possible, yeah.
Now, terminals and consoles have come a really long way, at least from what I've seen. Do you think something like this would have been possible in the way that it is now, like 15 years ago or 10 years ago? I mean, I guess you might not even been in IT back then, but because I know like terminal has different characters you can use and rendering stuff.
A lot of what is in there would have been. So SpectreConsole itself, their library does a lot of that compatibility stuff. It can actually run on like the super old terminals. So it interrogates what your terminal's capable of and changes how it's behaving based on that. So you could always do this. It wouldn't have quite as many colors, no true color support, maybe not rounded corners. So some of those new Unicode characters weren't there, but you could do very similar things. You always had the fundamentals, which are the terminals, a row of text, row of columns and rows of those. And you could always take the cursor where you're currently sitting on the screen, move it somewhere and write some text out. So you could always do that basic drawing thing. So yeah, you could always do what's done in there, I think.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier these days.
You're a Windows terminal user?
Yeah, no, I do. I love Windows Terminal.
You use any WSL stuff?
A little bit. I found out on the last user group I was on that this thing works on Mac and WSL because I'd never checked that. I guess the GitHub pipelines actually run on Linux, so it's kind of implicitly tested. Yeah. Yeah,
I think a lot of that automation stuff does.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of WSL, to be honest. It's convenient, but for all its convenience, it has a lot of gotchas. So I find it personally useful for a few bits and pieces, but I find the amount of time I spend trying to teach people exactly what's happening with the network between their Windows machine and the WSL and the different modes you can put it in, and also the case sensitivity of like files across the operating system. So you might get stuck because you've renamed a file from uppercase to lowercase on Linux, and then Git doesn't understand it on Windows. And I'm just like, it's just easier to stick with one rather than a mixture of both.
Yep.
It's there, and I use it for bits and pieces, but
yeah, I like it for some hacker tools, but definitely some limitations there. And I actually switched my main device to a Mac, and I've definitely been caught by the having uppercase in a file name, and I'm like, wait, this file doesn't exist? What are you talking about? And then I look at it like 10 times until I realize, oh my goodness, that's right. We're in case sensitive land now, boys.
Yep, it can be fun.
So before we hit record, we were talking a little bit about PowerShell Run. What is that module and how is it different than yours? Because I think they have some similarities in terms of what they're going for, but can you give me some insight into that?
So PowerShell Run is more like what you'd think of as a typical TUI. It's a TUI application, so it's a terminal UI for launching things. It's like a launcher. The module itself, I think what Madges has done is done a lot of what I previously would do, which is write a lot of those widgets by hand. I think their widget library would actually be cool because they have the whole text input and like live updating bottom piece. They have contextual menus, a lot of stuff that's not available in SpectreConsole because SpectreConsole is not a TUI framework. It's a widget library. There's a lot of that stuff which is real cool. The differences between the two are PowerShell Run's really an application that's a TUI. SpectreConsole is for helping you get to build those types of things.
Yeah, I think if you're going to use it for modifying scripts or like enhancing scripts, I should say, or whatever, I think SpectreConsole is a great choice. But I do like PowerShell Run as, like you're saying, a run point where you can run your stuff and kind of be a helper in that regard. But it's cool to see we have multiple projects that are doing really cool things like that, to be frank, are way above what I think I could do in the PowerShell world, given my current skills and time availability. And they're just available for you for free.
Yeah, the PowerShell Run, when I first saw it, I thought, oh, that's cool. And I kind of wanted it to install Winget packages or just like any package manager kind of thing. And I opened a branch for that. And then Madges was like, oh, I see what you're doing, but like, I want to do this differently. And I was like, cool, whenever you're ready. And eventually they had like they rewrote a lot of how they were doing PowerShell Run so that you could add more modular stuff to it, which was quite cool. So it's got all that stuff now, which is neat.
Nice. And I see you refer to them as Madgers. I always said MDGRS. I don't either.
MDGRS-MEI.
Yeah. I don't even know what any of it means, but it's got to mean something.
No, I've been hanging out for them to join your podcast.
Oh, I've tried.
They're a mystery. They are a mystery.
I've had some chats with them. They're an awesome person, but kind of enjoys just creating the projects and letting people use it kind of thing.
Yeah.
But that'd be a great one someday. But on the topic of other things you've done, so I mentioned earlier the Snake game for the Code Mash. Was it called Code Mash or Code Smash?
Code Camp. So we got a thing in Wellington here called Code Camp, which is it's like a free to attend. Is it one day? Yeah, it's one day free to attend. People can come along and just hear from people in the industry, network, and learn some things.
Yeah, and I thought that your talk was very insightful. Anytime anyone's actually building power, especially someone with some development chops like yourself, I think that it is so insightful. And it's how I initially learned and gained confidence. And like, okay, I can do this too, is seeing the way other people approach things, seeing the way they navigate and test. But what did you do in that talk?
The gist, I guess, was to talk about terminals and how they kind of render things, how tools like SpectreConsole and stuff can operate. Probably at the lower level. So I was talking about cursor manipulation, moving the cursor around the screen, changing the color, changing the mode, hiding the cursor, that type of stuff, and how that's all achieved by sending effectively special characters to the terminal. So if in your Windows terminal or your PowerShell terminal, you do a backtick and then B and hit enter, that'll be a bell character. So it goes ding, that type of stuff. So explaining how all that works and what kind of things are available. And then I built a game of Snake because I tweeted about it like literally 3 or 4 years ago and said I'd write a tutorial, and I never got around to it. And I've always had it at the back of my mind that I felt like I failed the community by never delivering on that. So I got around to doing it. And then I did a live demo at the Code Camp Wellington. And I went up and I realized I had way more to write in 45 minutes than I could achieve. So I kind of didn't quite get to the end, which is why I recorded it afterwards. And that's on YouTube.
Yep. And a link to that will be in the show notes. And, you know, if you ever want to join the Gainesville PowerShell user group and show us for yourself and get some questions as you go, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, definitely.
And you like how I asked that when the podcast is live?
I know. You want me to commit live.
Commit live,
what time zone is that, though? Am I actually going to get up at 3 a.m?
No, we will adjust to you, and we'll do it virtual. So even if, it's not the most prioritized time for our people here, we'll be able to have it on YouTube. And I'm sure some people take their lunch breaks to attend that, especially, yeah. You've got me excited with all the stuff you've been talking about. So I'm hoping others are kind of feeling that same energy, because TUIs are just sick. We all write PowerShell if you're listening to this, and that's cool. But when you get that interactive element, especially when the barrier to entry is low, it is just the sickest thing ever. And it's whenever I encourage people to do things in any aspect of learning PowerShell, the more interactive, the more feedback you can get, the more you can take it out of just being text in your terminal, the better. I mean, I know it's objects, but it just, I don't know, it scratches that itch for me at least.
Yeah, I like to see stuff. See stuff. I'm a visual person.
Yeah.
Like you said, I like to see things, and I wasn't quite getting that itch scratched when I deal with the built-in prompts and things.
So recently your focus has mostly been on SpectreConsole. Is that kind of where you're hoping to stay, or are there new projects that you're thinking of, like, oh, this has got to be the next one? Are you kind of happy with where things are? You don't need to write any new tools quite yet.
I've got lots of projects. I like to finish something before I start a new one. SpectreConsole is kind of at a point now where I feel like I can safely not have to invest too much time into it. Doug Fink asked, I think, a couple of months ago on Twitter, he's like, hey, why don't we have this library but for PowerShell? And then the creator of SpectreConsole said, have you checked out the PowerShell version of it, which was mine? And Doug goes, yeah, it's not really, it hasn't been finished. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I went and knocked out all of that rest of that stuff because it gave me the motivation to finish it up. Now that it's in that state, I don't really know what the next things are. I've had a lot of people ask me about how I generated the documentation for the SpectreConsole library. So I'll probably pull that out of what I've done and write a module for taking your PowerShell module and generating a help site from it. That one's been documented a few times before, but I did things quite differently, and a few people have said they want to steal what I've done. So
I do too. I completely wanted to, that's one of the things I want to talk about is your help documentation is sick. I mean, it brings the same kind of, like, you're bringing something from a different world that we don't currently have in the PowerShell world to your documentation, which is poshspectreconsole.com. Check it out. But yeah, that's fancy, man. How did you know to even approach it this way? Did you see other projects maybe in the C# world with documentation like this, or how did this come across your eyes?
The SpectreConsole docs themselves have like animated previews of what the widgets do. And I thought I could probably do that. So I had a look at how they did it. And I realized it wasn't quite going to work for me. And so I just kind of played around. I had that in the back of my mind. I knew I wanted to achieve it. Probably before I'd actually written the module to begin with, because I like to learn by example. So I like to see what can be done. And I didn't want to duplicate my efforts because I spent a lot of time before maintaining websites plus maintaining the code that it's for and trying to like correlate them. So I wanted my PowerShell comment-based help to actually drive all of that. So I've got it so that the actual website is driven from the help blocks in the PowerShell. So if you look at like get help -example for one of the module things like read Spectre selection, you'll see it has like a little heading saying what the example is. It then has how it would be the code that would generate it. And then it also has a little directive called like, it's a comment, and it says comment and it says type, and then it has a bunch of characters in double quotes. It's just a comma separated list of characters. And that directive actually gets used during the build so if you're reading the example, it still reads like you would normally. So it'll say, oh, type this out, then press down 3 times, then press enter, and then it'll do this. And that press down 3 times is actually being executed during the help generation. So that's how all those animated examples are done. So I wanted them to be human readable plus generate the docs. And that was something that I managed to achieve with like a 500-line spaghetti code PowerShell script, which is in the repo. It's so gnarly. That's why I want to write it as a module, because it is useful. And I think something like help out, the module help out, that's what I use to generate the markdown. That could probably have a few extensions made to support the format that things like the site Astro uses. So they use like NDX files, but they require a bit of metadata at the top of the markdown file to help drive the website. So it knows what the title of the page is, where it kind of sits in the directory tree and stuff, and what tags to attach to it. All of the stuff that I'm thinking of would probably be better suited to be part of something like a help out module. So I don't know, I might have a tinkle with that and see how it works.
That's James Brundage module too, right?
Yeah, I was originally using, what's the older one? There's another one for generating Markdown, and I've forgotten what it is.
It's some Microsoft one, I think.
Yeah, there are a lot of examples on how to generate Markdown from your module so that you can use it in like Docusaurus, which is Facebook's website generator thingy. But yeah, I found Docusaurus too fiddly. Astro Starlight, which is a template of Astro. It was much easier to use and required less mucking around. So I was like, if I have to write as little JavaScript as possible, that's a benefit to me.
Yeah, I think it's Platyps. That was
Platyps,
like,
that's the one.
It's some animal.
Yeah, it had a couple of gotchas. It didn't work with modern modules, and updating that library was deemed too risky for the benefit. Risk reward just wasn't there. So I was like, okay, I'll just leave it and find something else.
I think I heard recently at some conference that they are working on some changes to it, but I don't know if that would be any benefit to this situation here. But I do want to comment, and this is my opinion. I'm not speaking for you here, but I think that your documentation is better than the SpectreConsole.net proper documentation. Just saying.
You're allowed to say that. No comment.
They're both good. I mean, I'll be honest. The other one's good, but I mean, the examples you have are a bit better, and you know the images, and I think you have like examples and stuff too. Pretty cool. So, gosh, man, you're innovating all over the place. I gotta say, on behalf of the PowerShell community, we appreciate your efforts, and I think we're all better for it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a learning experience. I feel better for it though. I've learned a lot.
Have you always had an affinity for documentation, or is that something you saw as a necessity at some point?
It's probably my least favorite part. It's not something I'm good at particularly. I've been told I'm a pretty poor technical writer, which is funny to have your compliment on the docs. Yeah, it's not something that comes naturally to me because I often don't require people to explain stuff to me. I like to learn by tinkering and playing. So often I'll read between the lines, whereas a lot of people read very literally. So if I don't put down exactly what I want someone to do, then I'll be like, oh, it's kind of implied that you would do that. But that's where things fall over. And that's why I've thrown up more examples than anything, because I'm better at writing examples than I am at writing step-by-step instructions.
I mean, I think I love any command that has examples, because guess where I go I go right to the examples to see how it's actually used. And hopefully they have a few different use cases too, to kind of cover some of the parameters that are there if they change things drastically. But you might have mentioned this, but I didn't quite connect all the dots. How do you get the images on your documentation to align to the commands? Do you have to upload those separately, or is it generated somehow?
That's all part of the same script. So it runs on GitHub and it reads all those help examples and it extracts them, executes them as script blocks, but it does a little bit of magic to flip things around. And then it generates a recording of what would have happened in the console, outputs it, and that's all part of the published website. So I don't do the recording separately. Those are all generated on the fly. They take a wee while to record because they're recorded in real time. So the actual deploy pipeline, if you look at it while it's deploying on GitHub, you'll see an absolute screed of text output because it's actually outputting all of that stuff as it goes.
Go ahead.
It's been interesting to see that because I didn't realize by doing all those examples, it means I've actually got a lot more test coverage, because I'll go look at the pre-release website, which is like pre-release.PowerShellSpectreConsole.com. And then I'll see stuff that's broken in the docs and I'll go, whoops, that probably should have been a test, but at least I can see it before it goes live.
Now, is that same image generation, does that apply to Start Spectre Demo? Because I noticed there's a slight border around that command.
Start Spectre Demo was my first one, so that's a special
and I think
case.
it is a special command too.
Yeah, I actually can't remember how that works. I think it might just be a screen recording, that one. So yeah,
but that is pretty wild. I mean, I've never seen that done before. To me, it sort of blows my mind. I got to read through some of your code and your pipelines here to see what's going on, but that is impressive.
Yes, Start Spectre Console is just a screen recording. I did some weird stuff in there, so it wasn't compatible with how I was doing the rest of it.
I could
I
see that.
intended on doing it, and then I realized it was not really necessary to release the version 2 stuff.
Yeah. Gosh, that is impressive. Yeah, I'd love to see some talks about that or whatever you can do. No rush, but gosh, man, that is some wild stuff. If you're listening to this now, check out Posh Spectre. Push. You call it.
I don't know how to say that.
I know. I'll just say PowerShell. PWSH is what we're saying though. PowerShellSpectreConsole.com/reference, and you can see a bunch of cool stuff there. I mean, really, really cool. I hope more projects borrow this approach, because if you're a beginner trying to learn some of this stuff, seeing the actual examples, seeing the actual output, it can take away the step of having to like look at a command, run it for yourself, look back, just kind of make that easier and more transparent and let you know what you're going for. Like if you know you want this certain look, oh, this command has pretty much what I want. I just need to change whatever it has to be the process objects on your computer or what have you. That's wild.
Yeah,
wow.
I'd love to have like a built-in terminal on the website so you could try things out. And I have seen it's getting more and more possible. Like there was a little bit of movement with PowerShell running in WebAssembly, but I've seen recently, I think it was, I actually don't know who it was. Maybe it was Justin, published that they've generated very, very, very cut down, small, fast PowerShell Docker containers. So that's also an opportunity. You can run them somewhere where it's cheap to run containers, and then when someone goes and types the website stuff, it can be sent there and rendered back on the website in a terminal, which would be pretty cool. Kind of like the Azure Cloud Shell, that type thing.
Yeah. And it's a wild time we live in with all these different available technologies and ways you can accomplish things. And I think, as you said, you're a platform engineer, even just within the clouds, all the different things you can connect and utilize without having to write them all from scratch is pretty sweet. But I want to get into some
money on.
Yes. Yeah. Well, there's that too. But hopefully your work covers all that. Or something. Maybe the $5 a month. Well, maybe we need a couple more sponsors, I think is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. No, I'll just keep angling for a Microsoft MVP to get the Azure subscription. There we go.
I know a guy. Not that I can actually guarantee anything, but what you've done here is really cool, man. I'm blown away. I knew that the documentation was good, but I didn't realize it had that interactive image generation aspect of things, which I've never even heard of being done before. Do yourself a favor and look at it. I mean, I'm kind of dumbstruck right now. So I think it's a good point to get to some of our harder questions, a little bit less related to some of the projects you've done. But I want to ask, what have you been listening to lately? Like, what's been going through those earbuds? I see you got 2 of them in right now. If you weren't talking to me, you're doing some other work. You wanted some background music. What are you listening to?
Well, my top one, it sounds incredibly nerdy, but there's I think it's a French musician called The Algorithm. Writes a lot of like a combination of like heavy metal techno stuff with silly names like Brute Force and all sorts of like, it's computer related puns almost, but the music's really good. That's an interesting set of music.
Is there no words in that?
Nah, that's all just
nice. Okay,
electronic
good.
music.
I'll be listening to that.
I like to not have too many lyrics going while I'm thinking, so stuff like that works well. Polyphia is another band I listen to a lot. They're just really good guitarists, so that's been my jam. And I recently just went to see Iron Maiden up in Auckland in New Zealand because they came to play, so that was cool to see. That was my music when I was at high school, and they're still cranking.
Heck yeah. Yeah, Polyphia is interesting. I like what they've done to kind of change or, come in the whole guitar thing with a fresh perspective and kind of change how hooks are done a little bit. Really enjoyable, fun music there. So cool. I'll have to check out Algorithm.
The Algorithm.
The Algorithm, excuse me. Yeah, we got algorithms everywhere, but not the Algorithm. Now, getting into our wrap-up questions here. The common parameters as they're known. What is one time something went wrong while maybe making this project or on the job, and how'd you handle it?
It's a combination of little mistakes. I haven't got any massive ones. The one that still I remember whenever anyone asks me, what's a mistake you've made, is accidentally buying the wrong license for some software when I was a consultant. So I used to do performance testing, and in some of these, like, I don't know, enterprise businesses, if the tool is free and open source, they don't want to hear about it. So you got to buy the licenses. You got to pay for the cool tools. So we were using some software called NeoLoad, and I needed to run a test. And every time you ran a test, you basically had to load a license, kind of like a prepaid phone card. Like you put it in, you say, I want to run a 1 hour test with 1,000 users, and here you go. And if you scripted it wrong, well, you go buy another hour's worth of time and you run it again. But I accidentally bought the wrong license. So I bought one for, I don't know, the wrong number of users. I bought 5,000 users instead of 10,000. And I was pretty new in the industry. And I just remember I'd used someone's company credit card, and I bought it after hours, and it was like 7 p.m. and I was pacing around the office, and I was like, oh, no, I'm going to get fired. Oh my gosh. And then eventually I rang my boss and I was like, hey, I accidentally spent $1,000 on the wrong license. And he's like, oh, that's all good. Just keep that one in your pocket for the next job. We'll just buy the right license now. And I spent an hour stressing about if I was going to get fired, and didn't realize just how little $1,000 was in consulting. Yeah, it's like not even a rounding error, really. That was probably one of my things that stressed me out the most. And in hindsight, it didn't need to stress me that much.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Companies got big budgets, bigger than. If I spent $1,000 my own dollars, I'd be sweating bullets.
Yeah, I think to my name, I had about negative $2,000 to my name at that point in time. So it was infinitely more than I had.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, with your knowledge now, and I would like to gear this towards people who maybe they have a CS degree, they went through that university thing, but they're trying to get actually started with a real job. What is some advice you'd give to yourself or someone else in that situation?
It's a hard market. Research the people you're applying for, and make sure that you tick as many boxes as you can possibly, even if it's a slight tick. If you have any experience whatsoever in a bunch of the stuff that they're hiring or for, like at the moment, we're hiring for summer tech graduates. We require C# development experience. A lot of people at university don't study C#. They'll do PHP, Java, all that stuff. It's always worth just having a look so you know potentially some of the questions to ask. It doesn't matter if you don't know C#, but if you come in asking stuff like, oh, so you use C#, why is that? Why would you use that over what I've learned at university? Those types of questions kind of show a lot more initiative than, I hear it a lot. I've written Java, so I know C#. They're basically the same. Like, wow, you have a long way to come. I remember saying that exact same sentence myself. In hindsight, I should have just maybe not been so blasé about what I knew, because they look very similar, but nothing's the same. You should always just try and get as close as possible to what's required on the CV. Obviously, it's not possible for everyone, but if you've got the time, dust up.
Yep. Put in that effort, customize that CV a little bit. Good advice. Good advice. And maybe some people who are applying for you right now will have researched and stalked you a little bit. They'll listen to this podcast. They'll ask all about the other projects you've worked on, and you'll be like, hey, wait a minute.
I did have one candidate ask me, why do you like PowerShell? And I got stuck, and I go, oh, well, kind of a choice I made. I did enjoy terminals. I did enjoy terminal programming. I grew up on Mac OS and stuff. So I was familiar with Bash, like intimately familiar with Bash scripting and shell scripting of other languages. Realized the PowerShell community was a little bit smaller. So if I wanted to invest in something, it was a community that could benefit more. Community sounds weird to say it. A smaller fishbowl for a bigger fish. I always think about that with opportunities, because I studied music at university, and being one of the 500 guitarists versus the 3 drummers, I should have picked a better specialty. And yeah, so I don't know, that's an interesting one.
Well, you're speaking to me. I was a drummer back in the day. I haven't played in a while, but I often miss being in a band. And there's something special about jamming, and drums are just so visceral. You get to take out your frustrations, get to be like the backbone of it. Yeah.
I did actually switch to drums halfway through.
Oh, did you?
I'm a terrible drummer, but I could play the double kick. So that was my talent.
Nice. Yeah. Double kick. That's its own world. What are 3 of your favorite modules?
I've already talked about PowerShell Run a little bit. That's one of my favorites. I'd probably, the modules like that where I see them and I go, oh, how's that work? That's the stuff that I get really interested in. PowerShell SpectreConsole, that's my jam at the moment because I've been using it myself. I've had a couple of colleagues use it for work stuff, and I've seen other people using it, and it's been fun to work on. So that's one that's up there. I was thinking about my modules the other day. I thought the one that I always use that I never think about is probably the best, and that's PoshGit. I've always got PoshGit running, and there's a couple others, I guess, like the James Brundage's ones, Help Out and Easy Out. They've been used to build PowerShell SpectreConsole, so they've been very handy. Although I never thought they'd be useful until I required them, and then they did a lot of heavy lifting for me.
Yeah, James is one of those who he sees a need, he creates an awesome module for it, and it helps others in the future. And I really like his approach. He's a pretty prolific programmer.
Yeah, I've talked to him a few times, and each time I talk to him, I understand a bit more, which is good because he knows so much that he'll start talking about things, and I have no idea. But I'm learning a lot of him, which is cool.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, people have enjoyed the episode. They've loved hearing what you're working on. Where can we find you on the World Wide Web? They want to connect. They want to see what you're up to. They want to maybe in the future hear you announce one of these projects related to documentation.
I still hang around on Twitter, x.com. I think I'm Shaun _Lawrie on that. You have to
link in the show notes. Yeah.
Shaun _Lawrie, Lawrie. I got a website, ShaunLawrie.com, or if you Google PowerShell and then SpectreConsole, you'll probably find some stuff. So that'd be good. I've also found the Discord PowerShell community a good place to hang out. I do have to apologize though. I'm more of a lurker than a commenter. Occasionally you'll see me post some stuff about things I've been working on, but my job is quite demanding in what people ask of me. So I'm quite enjoying my relaxing time outside of work, not talking to too many people.
I hear you there. Yeah. I took a lot of PowerShell as part of the day job. So that's nice to have a little relaxation, but that's aka.ms/PS Discord. If you want the short link to join the PowerShell Discord. Thank you so much, Shaun, for joining us. And thank you out there for listening. I hope that you've had as much fun listening as I've had chatting with Shaun today. There's a lot of stuff in what we talked about today that you can dive into and learn more about. And if you enjoyed the episode, share it with a friend, maybe a coworker who needs to see the light of PowerShell. Maybe they're writing some scripts and they could take advantage of some terminal interface goodness, some fancy formatting, some colors, bring a little spice to their life. And while you're at it, give us a like, comment, and subscribe on maybe Apple Podcasts, maybe Spotify, wherever you are. We'd appreciate it. Spread PowerShell to the masses. Walk safe, drive safe, be safe, and take care of yourself. Thanks, everybody out there. Thank you so much, Shaun, for joining us today. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.